Hi friends, this week we're going to start a new series of books, and the theme of the books will be simple biographies. If you remember, a while back we read some biographies, and then a biography is a book written about another person's life. This week, the 5 books that we will be reading will be Zora Hurston and the Chinaberry Tree, Celia Cruz, Queen of Salsa, Manfish, Snowflake Bentley, and The Pot That Juan Built. As we were reading, we want to think about the big idea, and the big idea is, what is a writer's reason for writing a biography? And there are 3 essential questions that we need to answer about that big idea. All right, so up here we see the big question, which is, what is a writer's reason for writing a biography? Now, one of the essential questions we can ask ourselves is, biographies tell about real people who made a difference in the world. So the question would be, what can you learn by reading about real people's lives? So as we're reading our stories, that's one of the questions we need to answer. What can we learn about their lives? Another question we can talk about is, biographies give you information about different time periods and cultures. So the question we ask is, what can you learn about history or other cultures from reading a biography? So as we go through our 5 stories, we're going to think about that and come up with an answer for that as well. And then finally, we're going to think, biographies make you think about your own life. So the question we would answer is, how does reading a biography make you think differently about your own life? So those are the things that we will think about this week as we read each story, and I probably won't have you answer all 3 questions for every story every time, but in the back of your mind, keep it there as a thought that as you're listening, you can answer those questions in your own head. All right, we'll get started on our stories soon. Hi guys, we're going to start off with copyright to say that we do have permission to read this for our e-learning days during the coronavirus. And I'm reading this to my 2nd grade students. And so today, guys, we're going to, as I said, we're going to talk about biographies all this week. And a biography is a true story about a real person's life. And today's book is called Zora Hurston and the Chinaberry Tree. William Miller wrote this biography, and Cornelius Van Wright and Ying Hua Hu created the illustrations. And here on the cover, you see this girl sitting underneath the Chinaberry tree. This girl is Zora Hurston, and she grew up to be a famous writer. Let's read to find out about her life when she was young. So I'm going to warn you, we don't learn in this story what she became famous for, but I did do some research and learned that she does become a famous writer. And it was during a time when African Americans did not have a lot of rights, and so she is a young girl during this time. Zora Hurston loved the Chinaberry tree. Her mother taught her to climb it 1 branch at a time. From the tree, she could see as far as the lake, as far as the horizons. Zora dreamed of fishing in the lake, catching bream and catfish in the moonlight. Zora dreamed of seeing the cities beyond the horizon, of living there one day. She wanted to see beyond the horizon, so she wanted to see more than what she could currently see. And I'm thinking, when I was reading this, I'm like, what is catching bream and catfish? I've never heard of bream before, but I'm going to assume and infer, based on the way it's used in the sentence, that bream is a type of fish. Now, but only boys fished in the lake, and only men traveled to the cities. Zora watched with envy as the wagons rattled down the dusty roads. Look at her. Well, her father told her to wear a dress, to leave tree climbing to wild boys who had no better way to spend their time. He told her to read the Bible every day, learn verses she could recite in Sunday school. He warned her about girls who didn't obey their fathers, girls who didn't grow up to be young ladies. Look at this illustration. How do you think she's feeling about what her father is telling her? Get the sense that she's not quite buying everything he's saying. But Zora only listened to her mother. She taught Zora that everything had a voice, the trees and rushing wind, the stars in the midnight sky. She taught Zora that the world belonged to her, even the lake and far off horizon. How is Zora's mother different from the people in Zora's life? Right? Her father's telling her, oh, don't dream those things. Women, she needs to just stay home and do those things and let the boys climb the trees. Her mother tells her differently. Her mother's saying, go for it. So Zora went everywhere. She walked into the town store and watched while the men played checkers. She asked questions and more questions until the men taught her how to play. She followed boys to the edge of campfires, listened while their fathers sang about John Henry, a man so strong he swung a 9-pound hammer from dawn till dusk. She learned about Death, the great square-toed one who lived in the west. Death sat on a platform made of palm leaves and ruled with a sword in his hands. Zora learned about Africa, the place where she and her people came from. In Africa, they had been kings and queens, builders of cities that stood for thousands of years. They worshipped gods who ruled the sky, the mountains and rivers, the stormy seas. And notice Zora back here listening. Is she part of the crowd? No, but she's listening and learning. One morning, Zora's mother didn't feel well. She told Zora not to worry, that soon she would be well again. She told Zora to go outside and play, to climb her favorite tree. But Zora couldn't play. She saw how tired her mother was. She saw the pain in her eyes. Day after day, Zora sat beside her mother's bed, telling her the stories she had heard beside the campfires. Her mother smiled and asked Zora to always remember what she had learned. Stories, she said, kept their people alive. As long as they were told, Africa would live in their hearts. Zora promised to remember. She promised to remember all the stories she heard and all the things her mother had taught her. Zora's mother slowly got worse. Men and women came to sit up with her through the long, hot nights. The town doctor came. He gave her pills and shook his head, walked sadly away. Even the root doctor tried his magic. He rubbed snake oil and mustard salve on her face. He burned a tall white candle beside her bed. But nothing worked. Zora was sitting in the parlor when her father told her she would not see her mother again. Zora felt as if she had died. She watched while the old people stopped the clocks, put sheets over the mirrors. She watched while the women cried and the men stared at their Sunday shoes. But then she could not sit any longer. Zora ran from the house, ran all the way to the Chinaberry tree. She climbed the first branch and the next, climbed almost to the top. A sparrow sang to her in a voice like her mother's. The sparrow told her not to give up, to climb even higher. Just like her mother would tell her, don't give up. From the top of the tree, Zora saw again the world her mother had given her. The lake filled with fish, the cities where she would tell people all she had learned beside the campfires. Zora promised her mother that she would never stop climbing, would always reach for the newborn sky, always jump at the morning sun. She would never stop climbing. Does that mean literally the tree? I don't think so. I think she meant in life. And this is the author's note. Zora Hurston was born in 1891. She grew up in Eatonville, Florida, the first all-black incorporated town in America. At an early age, she was exposed to the rich oral tradition of her community. Stories, songs, and folk tales that celebrated African life. So that means that it was, remember we talked about, we passed down stories verbally. We share them by telling them. That's what she was exposed to, was the verbal retelling of these stories. Zora attended Howard University and Barnard College, where she studied anthropology. She traveled throughout the South recording the folk tales of her people. She published these stories in a collection called Mules and Men. Zora was also the author of many works of fiction. Her most famous novel, The Eyes Were Watching God, is a classic of African American literature. So that's what she became famous for. The